Welcome to Africa News with me, Chris Moore. Coming up, Conakry on alert. 8 cases of Ebola confirmed as the outbreak spreads to the Guinean capital. This with further suspected infections being investigated in Liberia and Sierra Leone. 3 days of mourning underway in the DRC after the boat disaster that killed at least 251 people. We report on the plight of the refugees seeking to return home from Uganda. In Kenya, controversy over a shoot-to-kill order. Police in Mombasa battle Islamic extremists. We'll have the latest on that with our correspondent, Duncan Woodside. We start with more deadly violence in the Central African Republic, where at least 20 people have been killed in an attack on a funeral in the capital, BANGUI. That after grenades were thrown into a crowd of mourners late on Thursday. Local people held an angry protest on Friday, blaming the attack on Muslims. The authorities saying those responsible were extremists known to the police. Well, thousands of people have been killed and around a quarter of the country's 4.6 million population displaced by months of intercommunal violence. The United Nations Refugee Agency has warned that French and African peacekeepers are now the only shield protecting Muslims from mass slaughter amid revenge attacks by Christians in the wake of last year's primarily Muslim Seleka rebellion. Now, fear reigns in Guinea's capital, Conakry, after it was confirmed the deadly Ebola outbreak has spread there. 8 cases have now been identified in the city. The disease had never spread among humans in West Africa before, but now further suspected cases are being investigated in Liberia and Sierra Leone. France 24's Alexander Turnbull has more.
The virus has reached the capital. After it was confirmed several people tested positive for Ebola in Conakry, medical teams have geared up to identify potential new cases and isolate them from other patients.
People move a lot, so those who are infected are in contact with other people. And our biggest problem at the moment is isolating the cases so we can put them all together in a special treatment unit, so that they are isolated and can't infect other patients.
The ministry confirmed on Thursday 4 brothers were diagnosed with Ebola after returning from a trip to the south of Guinea for a relative's funeral. According to the health minister, those infected all came in contact with the dead body. Their families were also placed in quarantine and their homes in the capital sprayed clean. But in recent weeks, government agencies have increasingly relied on international NGOs to fight the disease.
Because we also have to treat the bodies of those who've died. We see families torn apart, wiped out, because this disease is very contagious.
In Conakry, where rumours have fueled fears of a disease outbreak, residents have been asked to avoid direct contact with people at risk and raw bat and monkey meat.
People are worried. All we can ask for is not to give in to panic, and mainly to respect the basic hygiene rules to avoid too much human interaction, because the Ebola virus is transmitted through bodily contact.
With upwards of 103 cases and at least 66 deaths reported, Guinea is the hardest hit by the Ebola epidemic. But authorities in Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast and Mali are working to prevent the virus from spreading.
Elsewhere in South Africa, the trial of Oscar Pistorius has been adjourned until April the 7th. This because of the illness of a senior court official there. The judge making this decision with the athlete due to take the stand for the first time to explain how and why he killed his girlfriend Reva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day a year ago. The blade-running sprinter denies a charge of murder, saying he mistook the model for an intruder. The government in the Democratic Republic of Congo says the death toll from Thursday's boat disaster on Lake Albert now stands at least 251. 3 days of national mourning have been declared after the deadliest shipwreck in the country's history. Around 300 people were on board the vessel, which was bringing refugees who fled fighting in the eastern DRC back home from Uganda. They complained of poor conditions in camps there. France 24's Aurore Dupuis reports.
Crowds of people on the banks of Lake Albert. Witnesses saw a boat full of refugees tip over. Most of them didn't know how to swim and drowned.
It was too loaded, and the driver was drunk.
On board, mostly Congolese refugees, including dozens of children. As authorities recover the bodies, anger keeps mounting. The victims had found refuge in this camp set up by the UN in western Uganda. Here, many have fled the bloodshed that pits rebel fighters against the Congolese army. Refugees denounce the terrible living conditions, overcrowded tents, lack of food and medicine. Some would rather return home than live here.
Even if they bring us more food, we won't accept it. We've suffered so much here.
The UN says it's doing its best to provide for the refugees, but the organisation faces huge challenges ahead.
We have to enhance our information campaigns in the settlements. We have to do that. We have to tell the refugees when it's safe to return. We have to tell refugees which routes are best to follow.
According to the UN, Uganda is home to more than 170,000 Congolese refugees, and with ongoing regional crises, namely in South Sudan, authorities and NGOs struggle to cope with the growing refugee influx.
Zimbabwe's foreign ministry has said President Robert Mugabe will boycott next week's mammoth EU-Africa summit in Brussels. This after the veteran leader's wife, Grace, was not invited. She's been declined a visa because she's the subject of sanctions. Egypt has a new armed forces chief and defence minister, General Sedki Sobri, sworn in on a day after Abdel Fattah al-Sisi resigned in order to stand for the presidency there. The decision from the man who led last year's overthrow of President Mohamed Morsi sparked anger on the streets of Cairo this Friday. 3 people, including an Egyptian journalist, were killed as police clashed with Islamists. To Kenya next, where the Inspector General of the Police has told officers to ignore a controversial shoot-to-kill order, gave the security forces the green light to shoot dead suspected Islamic extremists who mowed down people at a Mombasa church on Sunday. 6 worshippers killed there, around 20 injured. This massacre, the latest in a string of attacks against Christian places of worship. They're routinely blamed on Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-affiliated group that originated in neighbouring Somalia. Well, for more, I'm joined by our regional correspondent, Duncan Woodside, in the Kenyan capital. Thanks very much for joining us. Duncan, what's the significance of today's statement by the Inspector General?
Well, David Kamayo's words really are being taken as a measure of damage limitation here, of course, in the context where this county commissioner earlier this week ordered the shoot-to-kill policy. And that order came in a context where Kenya's government and security forces have been widely accused of perpetrating extrajudicial killings, particularly against radical clerics with alleged links to Al-Shabaab. That's the Somali terror group. Now, obviously, this is a situation where people, the critics of the regime, the critics of the Kenyan government have seized upon this shoot-to-kill order as evidence of disarray within the security forces and pointing to the fact that rogue elements could well be responsible for such killings. And there is a feeling here in Kenya at the moment among the Muslim community, particularly among young men, that they're being unfairly targeted. And of course, the original announcement from the county commissioner this week will have done nothing to alleviate that siege mentality, particularly among young Somali men here in Kenya.
Talking about the Somali element there, Duncan, I also understand that Kenya's government this week announced all Somali refugees, including those staying with relatives of Kenyan nationality, will be relocated to camps. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That's right, yes. That's an order that's come from the Kenyan government this week, and it comes in a context where there are hundreds of thousands of people already hosted in refugee camps in northern Kenya, those people having fled the conflict in Somalia over the last few years. But there are, of course, other Somalis who've sought refuge with families in the Kenyan capital and elsewhere. Now, going forward, obviously, those people will be, it appears, relocated to those camps, and the Kenyan government is justifying that on the basis of the fact that many of the atrocities perpetrated by Al-Shabaab have been by Somali nationals, by refugees, effectively. But at the same time, there's a large degree of radicalization among Kenyan Muslims. And of course, such harsh moves will do little to change this perception of a siege mentality and could in fact lead to further radicalization, according to critics of the government.
Duncan Woodside in Nairobi, thanks ever so much for joining us. That's it for Africa News. Claire Murphy will be back with the headlines very shortly. Do stay with us here on Live from Paris.